Hello and welcome to the Night Owl Philanthropy Podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones, and in this series I ask charity leaders and change makers to tell us about their why, the purpose, experiences and values that drive their work. And each episode goes beyond campaigns and job titles to uncover the real stories and motivations behind social impact leadership, exploring what it takes to stay resilient, purposeful and compassionate in a demanding sector. Today we're leaning into those themes through the lens of youth homelessness, housing and opportunity, and I'm delighted to welcome Simon Green, Chief Executive of Milton Keynes YMCA, an organisation providing safe accommodation, support and pathways into work and education for young people who might otherwise be at real risk of homelessness and isolation. Simon, thank you so much for joining me. Let's begin, as we always do on this series, with that key question: what is your why? You've led Milton Keynes YMCA through some very testing times. When you strip everything back, what is your why? What keeps you in this work with young people?
Yeah, hi Dean. Good to be here. It's a short but very big question, that one, isn't it? So, yeah, what's the why? Well, I guess the first thing to say is I've always been very committed to doing some form of public service. I guess I'm motivated to impact the world positively and make the world a better place. And the YMCA just turned out to be a sort of perfect environment for me in which to do that. We have, as you've alluded to, it's just a lot of challenge in my time here, and it's just a lovely sized organisation because, and we're lucky, the YMCA's got that sort of international brand. Who's heard of it might not know what we do, but they've heard of it and they even know a song about it. So it's recognisable, but it's still quite a small organisation. It's local, and the beauty of the YMCA is you can never get too far away from the front line. You know, the recipients of our service are very loudly and very vocally present in our environment, so keeps you humble and keeps you close to the front line. So that's great. But also, I mean, I've got actually quite a personal connection to this YMCA, going back into my past, and that sort of keeps me very motivated. I don't know, I don't really have that separation between the YMCA being a workplace. I just feel like it's an important place in the community in which I live.
Great. And so when people ask you what you do, how do you usually introduce yourself and explain your role at YMCA?
Well, the truth is I'm not a particularly social person, so I don't get asked that by people that much. When I do, I guess I'll probably try and avoid the conversation a little bit. I'll tell them I work at the YMCA. I guess I'll sort of talk about us providing housing and support to young people, and then tend to talk more about the challenges that young people experience these days in just finding a decent place to live and opportunities to get on.
And can you take us back to the point where youth homelessness and exclusion in Milton Keynes specifically stopped being sort of an abstract issue and became something that you felt personally responsible to act on, if that's how you feel about it?
Yeah, well, so when I came to work at the YMCA, I'd not worked in supported housing before, so it was a little bit of a mystery to me, actually. You know, what's the environment going to be like supporting young people? Back then, we very much did see ourselves as a homelessness service. We had a homeless hostel, and I was sort of intrigued by that. I guess the thing that struck me most when I first came is this wasn't you sort of have visions of what homeless people look like and are like, and it wasn't like that at all. And these were young people that looked the same as any other young person. You know, you walk past these people in the streets, you weren't going to recognise them as homeless. So it was a bit of an eye-opener for me. And that was sort of 2009. I started working at the YMCA. Over the next few years, Milton Keynes did develop quite a significant homelessness issue. It became a very visible problem for the city, probably particularly around sort of 2017, 18. It was as Milton Keynes was coming up to its 50th anniversary, actually. I remember walking around the town centre and counting the number of homeless encampments, and there were 49 homeless encampments that I counted in the underpasses in central Milton Keynes, and it was out of control, and it became a hotspot, and national newspapers were starting to write articles about it. And it's to the credit of the local authority, actually, that they implemented the Housing First scheme in Milton Keynes and rehoused all of those people. So it became far less visible. But I know we've got inbuilt systemic issues in this country around how we produce housing. That means we don't produce enough affordable housing for people per se, but I think young people get the worst end of that, because when they're going out in the world to find their feet and become adults and start working, we're not providing the very foundation that they need in terms of providing homes for them.
So was there a particular young person or situation early on that, I know you mentioned about the 49 homeless people that you counted out in Milton Keynes at one stage around 2017. Was there a particular situation early on that sort of really crystallised for you why MKYMCA has to exist in Milton Keynes?
Yeah, well, actually, this is where my sort of personal connection comes in. So I came to work in 2009, but 10 years before that, in the late 90s, when I was at university, and when I finished university, my sister lived at the YMCA in the old flats before we'd knocked them down. And my best friend also came to live at the YMCA for a year. While we were at university, my friend's parents had split up. His dad had had an affair, so he came back and found himself homeless, actually. He was angry with his dad, so wouldn't move back into the family home, and his mum was then living in a bedsit, so he couldn't stay with her. So he came to the YMCA because he was in a homeless situation. He spent a year living in the old flats here, and I spent a year sleeping on his sofa. So we thought it was great. We were both 21 years old and had that bit of independence. But at the same time, my sister lived in one of the flats here, and she'd grown up. She was dyslexic, and that went undiagnosed until she was 15. As a result of that, she never got on very well at school. She really struggled academically. She was bullied as a result of that. And because school wasn't a good experience for her, she truanted quite a lot. She was quite a feisty character, so there was sparks flew a lot of the time. So a quite challenging upbringing. And when she reached sort of adulthood, 18, it was time for her to leave the family home. So she also came and lived at the YMCA. And their experiences of living here was very different. So for Howell, it was exactly what he needed. He was homeless. He got to spend a year here while he found his feet, and he then went off and trained to be a lawyer, actually, and is continuing as a lawyer to this day, and has got very well and got on very well. And we'll look back on that period as the YMCA was exactly what he needed when he needed it. My sister had a different experience. She got involved in drugs while she was living here and became a heroin addict, basically, while she was living at this YMCA. And that was obviously a very traumatic experience for our family, and the legacy of that overshadowed the rest of her adult life, actually. And she passed away a few years ago. And that's obviously a sort of unusual background for anyone coming into a workplace to have had that personal connection. So I think I've been here a long time now, I've been here 15 years, but I've always had that background understanding that if we offer the right services in the right way and offer the right support, we can have a really positive impact on young people's lives. If we're not safeguarding young people here effectively enough, if we're not offering them the right support, then actually bad things can happen as well, and potentially lives can be impacted negatively. And we get lots of young people here who've had a difficult start in life and a background in trauma. So they're the experiences that really continue to drive me. My work, and I see those sorts of shadows of that in lots of the young people that we support. And in fact, only on Saturday just gone, I bumped into a young lady who in the supermarket whose experiences have a lot of similarities to my sister. She reminds me of her in some ways, and we were talking about her experience of being at being at our YMCA and how that's impacted her positively. And she had a child with her, a young boy, and she was very happy and well. Yeah, so it's a privilege to be able to have that impact on young people's lives.
Yeah. Obviously, the start of this interview, we asked the big question, which is, what is your why? And very rarely so far is the why revealed right straight away. It comes through these conversations. But would you say that that sits at the heart of your why then, in terms of why you do what you do, because of that very close personal contact, or is it other things as well?
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I didn't tell anybody here that story for the first 10 years I worked here. And not because I particularly wanted to keep that to myself. I think it just didn't occur to me, in all honesty, just what intense motivation that had continued to be.
Yeah.
And I think it had actually reached a point where we'd done this big redevelopment project, and that had been incredibly demanding for me. We were a sort of small local charity dealing with all the issues that small local charities have, but we also took on this massive redevelopment project as well. So it was incredibly challenging. And we came off the back of that when I really needed a period of rest and recuperation and a little bit of celebration. What we actually got a week later was the pandemic and all the challenges that brought. We reached a point where I was quite exhausted, but also quite frustrated. I was frustrated because the vision we had of what we were trying to create hadn't yet been fulfilled. And I actually think I'd become quite grouchy. And a lot of my staff, I'd noticed that I was sort of impacting some of the staff quite negatively, and I was nitpicking and criticising things, and I could tell that I didn't really have the hearts and the minds of the team. And it was only at that point that I thought, you know what, you need to share with people why this is so important to you and what it means and why you're being so demanding and why all the details really mean so much. And so it was at that point that I first shared this story with my team. And yeah, it was quite an emotionally sort of fraught conversation, really. I felt like I was bearing my soul a little bit. So yeah, I think the sort of penny dropped for me at that point, but that was such an impactful thing to do. And I think once the team saw that vulnerability and understood why it mattered so much to me, everybody else got a bit more bought in. And I think that we've gone from strength to strength since then, really.
First of all, thank you very much for sharing such a personal sort of insight, both from your friend's perspective, who, as you said, has gone on to achieve great things. Is he still in Milton Keynes?
He's not. No. I'll need to invite him back. He hasn't seen the new building.
Has he not? Okay.
No.
And obviously the information you shared about your sister, and obviously very, very sorry to hear that. The next section was going to be on sort of early years and tough periods, and obviously that would most certainly be included within that. When you first stepped into leadership at YMCA, what did the organisation look and feel like on the ground? You've talked a little bit about that in terms of what your friend and your sister experienced, but can you sort of describe in more detail what that looked like? Because it was very different.
It was very different, yeah. I mean, I'd had that sort of background perspective of spending time in the YMCA, and in all honesty, when I'd visited it then, it was a little bit run down. The facilities were run down. And so coming about 10 years later, I'd say I was probably shocked, actually, at what I found, certainly disappointed. I think a lot of the people that came to live at the YMCA felt they'd hit rock bottom. And I think our YMCA basically said to them, yes, you have, this is rock bottom. We had some facilities which were 40 years old and hadn't been maintained very well. We had original kitchens and bathrooms that were sort of rotten and falling off the walls. We had the intercom system to our flats had broken, no longer worked. So if anyone was visiting anyone, they'd have to shout or throw stones at people's windows. This was a sort of pre-mobile phone age. That made for a really sort of grim environment. There were always people shouting, and so it was quite moody. The place hadn't even had a lick of paint for years, so it just didn't feel like a positive environment for anybody to live in. And we were putting large numbers of vulnerable adults there. The properties were unfurnished. It felt very grim. And I spent sort of my first 5 years really at the YMCA trying to improve all of that and trying to find funds to invest in the facilities and just trying to build more of a positive community.
Yeah. And you've spoken before about those periods where things were tight and the future was uncertain, but what did that actually feel like for you as a leader? I think you obviously talked about having to be really honest with your team about that period during COVID, but I think there are things that predate that. I think that
Yeah, it was a difficult one because um, we'd had when I came, there was a staff team who'd been around for quite a long time, and it was a good group of people, but I felt like the circumstances they operated in really didn't work in their favour in trying to um, in trying to be sort of inspirational to the young people we were trying to support. I'd love to say that I had a really positive vision of the future and that I unveiled this positive vision and led our people towards the promised land of, all the great stuff that we offer now. The reality is I didn't have a clue what I was doing. Before coming to the YMCA, I'd had only some very junior management experience. So really learned how to become a leader during my time at YMCA. Undoubtedly, the way you learn most is through mistakes, and I undoubtedly made many mistakes in that regard. And I think a lot of the motivation almost came from negative reasons. It was about moving away from what we were delivering towards a sort of vague vision rather than having sort of clear direction of where we wanted to go. I guess what I did have is a real determination and a real belief that we could do something better. And commitment towards the cause. And when there was a very extended period of time where it felt like everything was against us, the world was against us. It was raining hard, the wind was howling, and it was just a case of getting our heads down and moving forward. Through that, when I became chief exec, we were down to 13 staff, and we were managing a facility with 150 vulnerable adults in. Lots of mental health distress, lots of chaotic behaviour. We were also doing a £20 million redevelopment project without any skills and expertise in that area. And it was just about working hard, just keep putting one foot in front of the other and working towards getting somewhere. I think the key really is just starting to build a team of believers, team of people that bought into that vision and were also willing to walk the hard yards, I suppose, to get to a better place. And that ultimately is what's led us to where we are now, which feels a lot more positive and a lot more comfortable.
Can you talk us through one of the hardest decisions you had to make during those?
What was one of the hardest decisions? It's very, very difficult to pinpoint. There were lots. I guess the hardest decisions have been related to personnel. And I think making tough HR decisions. Anybody who comes to our YMCA now almost unanimously talks about how friendly an environment it is and how welcoming and how positive. And that's really important. And we care deeply about that and we cultivate that. They didn't come easily, and it required lots of tough conversations with people about whether this was the right environment for them and whether their motivations were aligned to what it is we were trying to achieve and who we were trying to be. So there have been numerous times where I've had to have tough conversations and help people understand that probably they're not bought into what we're trying to achieve here. And we need everybody here to believe in what we're trying to do and contribute towards that for it to be effective. So, yeah.
That sounds like a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. Is there a story of a young resident that stayed with you and stopped you from maybe walking away from the whole thing?
Yeah, and there's been lots, to be honest. I I wouldn't necessarily pick one, but and I think part of the beauty of working at this organisation is so many of the young people that are in Milton Keynes have passed through our facility. You know, we estimate about 10,000 young people have passed through here over the years. And like I say, I bump into people all the time. Bumped into this young lady in the supermarket on Saturday. And, you know, it doesn't happen every week, but it happens periodically. You know, the receptionist at my dentist was a young lady who lived here. And even when things haven't gone brilliant. So the girl I saw the weekend was evicted from here, actually. But even unanimously, all the time, they'll reflect on the kindness they received here, the support they received here, and they look back on it as fondly and as a really important time in their life. So, yeah, I guess that's one of the joys of doing this work. Also, often what we try and do is believe in them even when they've sort of lost that belief in themselves. You know, a lot of them will be come to us at a period in their life where they may be a little bit lost and frustrated and angry and probably not at their best. And, you know, our team have become very skilled at helping to support them with all of that emotional turmoil and calm them, investing in them and supporting them and helping them to create a more positive vision for their own future and start to pursue that. You know, that sort of thing's invaluable, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about failure, sometimes making mistakes and how you learn from those mistakes. It's not like you get to a stage and we've achieved everything and now we don't have to worry about anything, because there'll always be challenges. I'm assuming in your sector and what you do, there'll always be challenges, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, everything's moving all the time and nothing stays the same and stays still, does it? And especially when you're dealing with people. And so, yeah, it's a constant struggle, the right word. Constant challenge, I guess, but yeah, that's what keeps it interesting.
Yeah, and so what do you think you've learnt most from those challenges that really gives you a sense of what it really takes to run a youth charity, which is essentially what it is, or a charity for younger people?
I think probably my biggest learning, and it applies in this environment, but probably applies anywhere, is that you've got to start from a foundation of honesty. I think to be truly successful and to have a really high performing team and culture, basis has got to be trust. Trust is a very difficult thing to achieve, and I think it can only be achieved through honesty, and honesty requires you to have difficult conversations. It requires you to hone in on the difficult stuff, the stuff that, you know, it might be easier to shy away from. And I think what I've learned is that the more you shy away from the tough stuff, the more it festers and becomes a problem and undermines everything else. So I think you've got to hone in and work on that tough stuff. And through that, you build trust. And from that trust, you get commitment, and then you start to achieve results. And that is something which you can't just do it and then relax and say it's done. It requires constant attention. And yeah, I think that's the key to success.
Yeah. To me, what it reminded me of is when you see these programs about people that go to join the army and they get broken down and then rebuilt into something that can actually contend with all of the things they have to contend with. And your story sounds like you've gone through that process, and you might not say you've come out the other side yet, but I would say you've come out the other side as this resilient, you know, ready to take on any challenge. You seem to have now all of the armor you need to be able to contend with all of those different things that get thrown at you from one day to the next. Am I right, do you think, in saying that?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think I've learned how to be a leader through adversity. I do feel very comfortable being myself because I feel like we've been through so much and experienced so much that I know how to handle it. And there's a guy. One of the great things about being in the YMCA network is there's lots of other YMCA chief execs doing the same work in different areas, and we come together every 6 months at a conference. And there's a guy I get on well with at another YMCA, and he said two things to me. I was going through that really tough period. He said to me, "Whenever I see you, Simon, you look like you've just staggered backwards out of a Wild West saloon bar," which was, that's how I felt at the time.
Yeah,
I did
yeah.
feel like I was just trying to stay on my feet. And he said to me at another time, he said, "I get the impression with you, Simon, if you got hit by a nuclear bomb, when the smoke cleared, you'd still be there standing."
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought that was quite a good
Yeah,
analogy.
I think that's a great analogy. Thank you for that. So I'm going to move on to sort of understanding what MKYMCA looks like today. And for listeners who might think that, and I think a lot of people think YMCA is just a hostel, how would you describe what MKYMCA actually does for young people now? What does it actually do that changes their lives and gives them a new start?
Yeah, well, I think probably the easiest shortcut is to say that it's a bit like a university experience for young people who wouldn't go to university and don't go to university. That's sort of what it has evolved into.
Mhm.
We've got our facility in Central Milton Keynes got 206 rooms and flats here, some of which are shared. So we got about 225 young adults living here at any one time. The accommodation is first rate. It's 5 years old, but it all looks brand new. And that's because it's valued by the young people that live here, and it's valued by the team who who are very committed to what they do and keeping it first rate and really believe in what we offer. It's a very supportive community, so any young person that comes and lives here feels at home, and they love being here, and they build really positive relationships with our staff team and with other residents. We're all about trying to make people enjoy themselves. We do lots of activity. In fact, we're taking a group of residents to Centre Parks in a
Great.
couple of weeks, so for a residential experience here. So there's a bit of squabbling going on here at the moment about who's got the places to go to Centre Parks.
Okay. So not everybody can go.
Not everybody can go, unfortunately. And so it's those residents who are doing what we feel, or most effectively doing what we feel they need to do to move
That's
their
good.
lives forward positively.
Are you using that as an incentive then to make positive steps? Yeah.
Yeah, incentivizing and rewarding. And listen, we're a professional service, so we have to be careful around professional boundaries. But ultimately, occasionally say to staff, we need to think about these young people in the way you would your own kids, really, and we should want the best for them, the same
Mm.
as you want for your children. And we should be always striving and aspiring to offer the very best that we can, because it's in doing that that we can really impact on them. And the more we value them and what we're offering them, the more they value themselves. So we're always aspiring to do things the very best that we can. The best way, in all honesty, for any listeners to get a sense for the place, if they haven't been here, is to visit our cafe, Home Ground. When we decided to build that, there weren't any independent cafes in Central Milton Keynes, and so we wanted to create one. And I think anybody who goes there loves it because they love the just the vibe of the place. They like the way they're treated by the staff. The quality of the coffee and the quality of food is first rate. It's a really, really attractive environment. And again, anybody who comes in there for the first time is surprised, and I can't really believe that this is your YMCA. And that quality feeds through the whole organisation now. We and I are very demanding, always expect the best.
Mm.
One idea that we haven't fulfilled yet, I remain very committed to, is I'd like us to recruit our own driving instructor. I'd
Yes,
like
amazing.
us to offer free driving lessons to all residents while they're living here, because we're always thinking, what's the best service we could possibly provide to young people. We've got clinical mental health counselling, because so many of our young people have required that. We've got an employment service, so we're routinely supporting young people into employment. And it's just it's a joy, really, to be able to provide all of that. And I think any young person that came to live here would have a brilliant experience and does have a brilliant experience.
I love the comparison you make to it being like a university for people that don't go to university, that you're seeing it as a place to nurture, build and grow and educate. And that's obviously ties in with what you were just saying, even about the driving lessons and things like that. That's great. So if we followed a sort of a new young resident from the moment they arrive at your door, what would their first few days with you look like from your perspective, from their perspective?
Yeah, so the accommodation here is split into three sections. So again, along those lines of university experience, 3 years, 3 stages. So we've got 30 rooms, which are for any young people who are unemployed and coming to us out of a homelessness situation. So it's quite a small room, but fully furnished. So they've got their own bathroom, they've got their own furniture, they've got a TV and Wi-Fi in their rooms. For a lot of these young people, they might not have had their own private personal space for some time. They might have been sofa surfing. They might have been in an overcrowded family home, sharing a room with brothers and sisters. So the ability for them just to shut themselves away and decompress is important, and we respect that. And then what we'll do is start to build relationships with them, so they would get a dedicated support worker as soon as they move into the building. And we've got activity staff who will get to know them. So that's about helping them settle in, making them feel like part of the community. And we'll start to invite them just on simple things, really. Like we do a group walk a couple of times in the week, and they get free gym membership as soon as they move in. So we'll invite them to, they can go on their own, or we'll invite them to a group session. We do quite a lot of craft-based activity, music, all sorts of stuff, really. So we try to get them linked into something that they might enjoy. We use our cafe at night. That becomes a sort of a canteen restaurant for residents. So they'll go and get a free meal downstairs. And again, that's a sort of community activity. So yeah, that's it really. We try and we try and apply a sort of gentle pressure throughout the whole time that our residents are with us. So we're always trying to encourage them to do things that are going to be beneficial to them. But being gentle is really important. And, we use a tagline, supporting young people to belong, contribute and thrive. And we take that really seriously. Making them feel like they belong. Mm-hmm. This community is really important and is a prerequisite to anything else that we might do.
Yeah. What would you say tells you that you're getting that right? How do you know when you're getting that right, that feeling of belonging, the atmosphere that you're creating to get them to that stage?
Yeah, it was quite interesting, really. So we've got a team here now who are very focused on data and demonstrating impact, and we do all sorts of impact reports. And we've had the University of Northampton has done a thorough assessment of our service and written big reports and stuff. And so for some of our funders, we do all of that. And I understand that that's got a place, but for me, you can sense it, and it's just it's in the faces of people you see. To be honest with you, it's in the background noise. So this place used to have lots of young adults who were in emotional distress. They'd had a traumatic time. They were struggling to regulate their emotions. They overreacted to things because they were angry and distressed, and little things would set them off. So the background noise often was people screaming and shouting and having arguments. That wasn't an unusual background noise. We don't get that at all anymore. And the background noise is laughter, that people genuinely are. You can just tell that people are relaxed and happy in this environment. I hope I haven't put the kiss of death on that now, because I am still at the campus. But so I can just say, and the way people relate to you. So, as I come and go into this building, lots of young people talk to me, and that doesn't happen unless people are comfortable and feel like they belong here.
So that's creating a culture and investing in that over a period of time so that you've got new residents coming in, residents that are there for short term, residents that are there for long term, and they're all feeling that sort of culture of belonging. It's quite a difficult thing to achieve, and it requires, obviously you've got that high expectation, but you then have to filter that expectation right across your team and throughout the entire environment. And you mentioned that there was a point in your time working at YMCA where the staff numbers were down to, I think you said 14?
13, yeah.
13. So what has your staff number grown to now to enable you to do all of those things with your residents?
Yeah, well, I don't know the exact number, but it's about 100 now.
Wow.
So we've grown a lot. We do quite a lot of youth and community work that's not based at the campus, and we've also got a service in Northampton now. So some of the staff relate to that, but there's probably a core team of about 60 here now. Yeah, and I mean, in terms of those relationships with residents, although I've been demanding in terms of not accepting that we're not going to achieve that. It's been my driving motivation to reach a point where that's the environment we provide. There's a whole team of people who go about achieving that, and I think they've had to grow and learn and develop as well, because when you're working hard and trying to create a positive environment for young people, and they don't always respect that, and they're rude, and they can be a little bit hostile and aggressive, which was the situation we used to have. I think there's a natural human reaction to respond to that in a way that probably isn't helpful either, and sparks can fly, and it can be a bit of a downward spiral. And I think we've had to learn over time. I mean, we refer to it as being psychologically informed and being trauma informed.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we've learned over time that we need to treat these young people in a certain way. We need to expect a certain set of behaviours, and we need to respond in such a way that it will sort of de-escalate that rather than the opposite. And I think the team have become very skilled about that, and also be very positively focused. So we try and accentuate the positive and focus on those positive things. And, the irony is a lot of the negative stuff then naturally falls away because, who doesn't have difficulties and challenges? It's just about enabling people not to dwell on those and that not to define them.
Yeah. I don't know what the provision is beyond MKYMCA and Milton Keynes, but is that, do you think, what distinguishes you as an organisation from other supported accommodation, either across Milton Keynes or within the region, that kind of culture of belonging and nurturing? And
yeah, well, I think there are other good services out there who equally offer really good support. I don't think there's enough of it, and I think that we don't necessarily have the same quality of accommodation, necessarily have the same scale that we do. This is a big facility. What that enables us to do is provide a sort of what's the term? We've got a certain scale which enables us to do more. But yeah, I definitely think if what's the best thing about this organisation, and people see the building and all of that sort of stuff. The best thing is the culture, and it's that sense of belonging. And I remember writing it when we wrote our strategic plan 5 years ago. First sentence was about being friendly, and I remember sort of people challenging that a little bit and saying, "Really, it seems a bit wishy-washy." But for me, that was always the really key starting point.
Great. I'm going to move on to, thank you for that. We're going to move on to the reality of youth homelessness and isolation. So for people listening who've never really had to think about youth homelessness, what does it actually look like in a place like Milton Keynes? You mentioned about the significant issues that Milton Keynes was experiencing sort of back in 2017, 2018. I don't think that issue will ever really fully go away. It doesn't go away in any other city. So why would it in Milton Keynes? But what does it look like in Milton Keynes, do you think, from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I would say is, I feel like being a homelessness organisation, we used to sort of impose this identity on young people that came here. And homelessness was probably the word you would hear most throughout the day in this place. And I felt, do you know what? Rather than treating this as an event that people have experienced that they want to leave behind them and move away from, we were sort of using it as this identity for for people. There was a period in time where I said, you know what, I don't want anybody to use the term homeless anymore. Don't want to hear it. It's
Yeah.
banned.
Yeah.
And that was very difficult for the staff at the time to comprehend. I think they thought I'd sort of lost the plot a little bit, and particularly our fundraising team.
Mm.
They wanted to use that as a means to sort of
An
draw on
emotional
people's
hook.
heartstrings,
Yeah.
exactly, and
Yeah.
get support. So
Yeah.
the first thing I would say is we very deliberately don't use that focus anymore. But of course, almost exclusively, the young people that come and live with us have experienced homelessness or challenges with housing. And I think it's a massively significant social problem in this country, and I think it's massively underestimated. And I know that there are structural problems that mean this is not going away. It's going to continue to be a problem, and it's going to worsen because the way we build housing in this country is market-led. The market wants to build homes for people with lots of money, predominantly, and they're required to provide a certain amount of social housing. But local authorities will always prioritise people with children and families.
Mm.
You know, probably rightly so. So the relatively small amount of social housing that is produced gets filled up with families, usually in overcrowded positions. Actually, what often happens is we build flats and then families get put in the flats, and that becomes overcrowded quite quickly.
Mhm.
And then young people are completely squeezed out of that. They're not given it opportunity. And actually, so homelessness legislation was brought in this country in the year I was born, 1977. So that was the first time local authorities were made responsible for homelessness in their districts. And there was such a sort of uproar from local authorities saying, how do you expect us to house all these people all of a sudden without additional resources? The central government agreed to put in a temporary criteria, priority need criteria, that it was only people with children or people that had had a fire, or I can't remember all of them, but there were 6 priority criteria that were introduced just to manage that initial demand. Here we are 48 years later, and those temporary criteria are still in place.
There.
So a young person will go to a local authority, and the local authority is under no legal obligation to house them. And so without organisations like ours, there'd be so many young people just with nowhere to go.
What different forms does homelessness come into, in terms of young people in it?
Yeah, well, so the people that have done research on this area report that 1 in 97 people in Milton Keynes is homeless or in insecure housing. So that's obviously a staggering amount. And, 1% of the population in Milton Keynes, we're 350,000 person city. So you're looking at 3,500 people who are not housed adequately. And some
That's
of
at
those.
any one time.
Yeah, any one time, and obviously it's a moving feast, and some of those will rough sleep, but the majority of those will be sleeping with friends or with family, and probably moving between those, so bouncing around between loved ones, maybe a little bit of rough sleeping in between, maybe sleeping in a car. And I think we've sort of reached a position where young people almost don't see that as abnormal. There isn't that expectation there that you reach 18 to 20 and you can find your own home. And I think you can even see it through, more sort of middle class, if you want to put it that way, well-to-do young adults who now live in their parents' home way through their 20s into their early 30s now. And probably, they've got a good job, so they've got disposable income. They go to the gym, they've got a nice car, they buy nice clothes, they eat out restaurants, but they still haven't got a home of their own and can't necessarily expect to get one. I think 100%. And I guess we support those young people for whom staying in the parental home isn't an option. They don't have that. And so we're offering them an opportunity to get that sort of dignity of having a good place to live.
Is there a story that you can share with us, obviously an anonymised story, where you've seen a young person's journey from sort of crisis to some kind of stability that you feel really captures what YMCA is trying to do? I know you've alluded to that situation with your one of your best friends earlier on. Anything that you sort of been able to see and watch happen in your 15 years?
Yeah, but there's a few. One that immediately springs to mind. I don't have to anonymise it. Actually, there's a lad called TJ who lived with us a few years ago, and I knew him as a very charismatic young man. You know, around and about MCA. At any one time, there's always a few young people who've got particular amount of charisma, and you know, perhaps get to know them more than I might some of the others. And I knew that TJ's story here was really positive, and we supported him to get a mental health diagnosis, and that put into perspective for him some of the challenges that he'd had in the past. And he met a young lady here, and you know, romance bloomed, and they've had a child, and they've now moved on and are living a very sort of happy life. And it was only after he'd been here for quite a long time that I heard him speaking at an event about his experiences prior to coming here. And he'd spent the winter before he came to live with us, he spent sleeping in a grip bin. He said there was a particularly large grip bin, and that was where he used to bed down for the night. And he spent a whole winter sleeping there. And you just think, without the opportunity that we gave him to come, like I say, live with dignity and have some stability, to think where he would be now and where he would have ended up. And you know, he's just such a lovely, engaging young man with so much to offer to the world.
Those stories are so important when it comes to sort of engaging supporters and decision makers. But you also said you wanted to steer away from talking about homelessness or reconnecting homelessness with YMCA. So how do you go about engaging supporters and decision makers without that sensationalism? You've taken somebody from a grip bin to a family, and he even met his partner at the YMCA and had a child from that point onwards. That's an incredible story. So how do you do that?
Yeah, well, I think actually, to be honest, the bigger issue is that the team here don't recognise the life-changing impact that they just have day in, day out. So they start to see it as routine. I remember when we first started to do some sort of comms and marketing activity, the staff that we brought in to do that, speaking to the operational team and saying, share some stories with us, and just getting blank looks, really. And I think those impactful stories are so commonplace, it's almost difficult for staff to recognise the value of them. We don't want to be too manipulative in terms of these are young people who are at a formative time in their life. Often are facing quite challenging circumstances, and we don't want to exploit that too much.
Just sort of dignity proof the whole process, don't you? I think that's come up a few times in previous conversations.
Yeah, so we want to respect the fact that, you know, we need to value their privacy. So we need to do that. I mean, we've just done some recruitment actually for some new comms staff, and the brief to them has been, look, we're doing fabulous work. It's really impactful. We're a really important service for young people, but the community at large probably doesn't understand that. They don't know what good work we do. They don't necessarily recognise how valuable that is and how they can support it. So we're wanting to tell our story more effectively and in a more engaging fashion. And so that's a work in progress. I've also said that I'd like it to be very authentic. You know, this is an environment that's about young people, and they can be quite a loud group of people, you know, maybe not the most polite people in the world, but that always, well, actually, I'm doing them a disservice there. What I mean is they're loud. And I think that we want that authenticity to come through. We want people to see what this place is about. And to be honest with you, the best place to do that is to come here. And so that's why I think having our cafe and having our conference facilities is so important, because so many people come in here and they say, wow, I can't believe this place, and just get a real sense of engagement with us.
Can you talk about some of the myths you most often find yourself challenging about young people who end up needing your support? Because obviously people will jump to conclusions about who they are, their backgrounds. It's not necessarily the case that I think anybody could end up in a position where they need your support. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. And they do, actually. It's really interesting that we've had some young people that have lived here whose parents are business owners in Milton Keynes, very successful people. Just for one reason or another, the family dynamic hasn't been working at that time and they've needed to live somewhere else. And we've provided a really positive platform for that. I mean, you've heard me talk about my own sort of personal relationship. And I say to my staff team, would you be happy with your children living here? And if the answer is yes, then great, we're doing our work well. And if the answer is no, then we need to focus on that and ask ourselves why not, and put that right. So you give me a bit of a flashback, actually. So I remember speaking at a business networking event and talking about wanting to create this positive, aspirational place for young people, and all the questions were about drug use, which I thought was unfair and unhelpful. And young people use drugs, of course they do. It's a stage of life that many young people go through. So do older people, actually. It doesn't define them. And, it's not what we would focus on. Our focus is on what they're doing with their lives and what are their motivations and what are they trying to achieve. And we do work with lots of young people who've experienced trauma, and lots of traumatized people will self-medicate for that reason. But we're all about creating positive new pathways for young people, and that's what we do. And to be honest with you, drug use here isn't particularly a problem. It's not. Certainly, I think in scale with the size of population we've got, it's quite normal. I think in the past maybe there's been sort of issues here, and I think it didn't help as well. The facilities here looked a bit run down, and I think people sort of projected that onto us, and so we had got a bit of a legacy of stigma, but that's falling away, and rightly so.
Yeah, great. I'm going to move on to focusing on leadership, recovery, and learning. Now, we've touched on a lot of this earlier on in the interview, so I'm not going to ask you to repeat yourself. But one of the questions I was keen to understand, you talked about how you've grown as a leader. How would you describe that change? What's changed the most in the way you go about leading people today as opposed to how you were perhaps 15 years ago?
Yeah, well, I think as a leader, you have to learn. It's like anything. You need to learn how to do it. So I did study leadership. I went on courses and I read, and I always looked for recommendations from people. And there's probably a few books in particular and authors who've been influential for me. So I read a book, Good to Great, Jim Collins. Don't know if you know that, Dean. Influential for me. There's a guy called Patrick Lencioni, who's a business thinker, and again, he was really influential for me. And I think one of the starting points I took from both of those was the idea. I think we all start out with an idea of a leader being very strong, very charismatic, making all the decisions, getting all the decisions right, and leading a team of devoted followers onto success. And I think that's fundamentally wrong. I think what I've learned is that isn't good leadership, and in actual fact, that can be really damaging. Keep making all the decisions at the top is quite disempowering for other people within the organization. And I think if that's your culture, then you're going to discourage people who are leaders in their own right from wanting to work there. So I feel like as a leader, my role is to create a culture where other leaders can thrive and can take ownership for their part of the organisation. And what that then means is your capacity for development is so much greater because you're growing and developing and doing really positive things across the organisation that don't all have to come across my desk. And that's really, really powerful.
Because when you're growing a number of staff from 13 to 100 plus, there comes a point where you can't manage every single action and, area of their work. It's just not possible. And if you tried, it would no doubt drive anyone, over the edge. And so I guess there's an element of trust and sort of being able to let go and trust in your team and for them to trust you as well in that. in that process?
Yeah, 100%. And it's very difficult going from a position where we had so few staff to a much bigger team. I almost feel like a sort of founder, really, because
Mm,
there was a point in time where we knocked all the facilities down and built a whole new team, and built a
mm,
whole new service.
mm,
It was wonderful to have the opportunity to be able to do that.
mm.
But because I was so involved in all of that, there was a period of time where everything did come across my desk, and it was like Simon Says, actually. It was,
Yeah.
why are we doing this? Simon Says, Simon Says. And so there was a period of time where I had to work very hard to move away from that culture. And there was a period actually where I completely disengaged from all of that decision making and said, I want you all to step up and take ownership of that. And that was difficult for everybody as well. And it's difficult to do that if you are still very particular.
Mm.
And very committed. I'm not sure I always got the balance of that right. But yeah, I think the key to leadership, like I say, is to learn and to to stay humble. Every day is a learning day, and try and do things better. To not be scared, not shy away from those difficult conversations and difficult decisions. And also be comfortable with vulnerability and humble, and don't be comfortable not being perfect at everything. And the more you respond in that way or behave in that way, the more people respond effectively to that.
I love the fact that you talked about the books that you'd read. So you're referring to people that have gone through that process, have the expertise, and then you're listening and in digesting their experience in that way. And I find that quite inspirational myself, and I think people that are listening would too, because I think sometimes there are leaders who can be perceived as slightly arrogant, and they know all the answer. They have all the, have the everything they need to do everything that they want. And of course, we don't all have those abilities and those experiences to do some really important things that you obviously have to do in your role. So moving from leadership to sort of impact, we talked about impact and measuring what matters. When a supporter sort of asks, how do you know whether the organisation is making a difference? How do you answer that in concrete terms? Because obviously we talked about the culture and how you've developed that. There's so many other things that the organisation is there to achieve, and how do you know that you're achieving it?
Yeah, and we've got a whole load of sort of data metrics, really. And so we do emotional wellbeing scores, and we use a sort of recognised model that's used by mental health services around that. We got specific sort of outcome measures, so we know the number of young people that we support out of homelessness. We know the number of young people we support into employment. So we do resident surveys and checking on satisfaction levels. But, for me, so one of the things we did recently is, so I recognised that leaving our campus was going to be a difficult experience for many young people. Housing options remain poor, and they go from having an affordable flat here, furnished and with all the support, to maybe a far more expensive property, which is just a room in a shared house that hasn't been maintained very well over the years and sharing with strangers. So we're developing our own portfolio of move-on accommodation. So
Mm-hmm.
we took on 38 brand new build flats last year, and we moved residents from our campus into those flats. And that was a new activity for us. And, whenever I do anything new, I'm slightly anxious. Is this going to
Of
work in the
course.
way that we hoped it would? But, I've been operating that for a year. And these are all young people that have come through our homeless pathway, through our support program. We supported them into employment. And I guess my fear was we'd move them off to these flats, and a lot of them would fall out of employment and wouldn't be living particularly positive, healthy lives. And without our ongoing day-to-day support, things would get worse for them. That hasn't been the experience at all. They've all continued to work. They're living very happily. We've just done a survey of them, and they're all loving life. Some of the comments back are wonderful. And so for me, I know that these are young people. We've created a support structure for these young people, and we can see that it's working for them.
And I suppose that's the thing, because you're obviously building a really nurturing environment, a culture where people feel like they belong. But actually, what you want eventually is for them to feel like they're ready to move on. So, is there a part of what you're doing where you kind of don't want to make their time there too comfortable, because you want to give them an impetus to then move to those next stage support houses that you've talked about, and then beyond that, I guess. So that then gives you
Yeah,
the
100%.
capacity to continue doing what you're doing for the next generation that may come through the system and need your support.
Yeah, 100%. And so we use this term contribute, and we do expect people. We're offering these young people something really great, but we are expecting something in return. And the thing we're expecting in return is that they're taking the steps they need to move their lives forward positively. And this is the area where I've probably cracked the whip the most over the years. I think actually this is the area where I would probably be critical of supported housing environments, because I think we're very good at supporting people who have had a difficult time and need help and support, and putting our arm around them. Where we're probably not intrinsically as strong as we could be is in giving people a bit of a kick up the backside when they need it. And again, I think, what do you do? What do you do with your own children? So I've got 3 teenage kids.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, sometimes they need an arm around the shoulder, but more often than not, what they need is the duvet pulling off them and being shouted at, and get up and get yourself to college and get yourself a job. And it's that element which, is tough love, isn't it? And it's done for the right reason, because that's what they need to progress their lives effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a bit challenging in this environment. And I'm pleased that we do that well. And I will take the credit for that, because I think that it's been my personal mission to ensure that we don't allow people just to use the YMCA as a bit of a DOS house, really, where you have those same expectations, because we do, and we do it for the right reasons. And, we don't expect our residents to go out and do jobs that they absolutely hate, but we do expect them to try and find a job that they might not hate, and, to be trying to pursue finding a job that they enjoy. That's an expectation that we've got, and that's a demand we make. And I think we do it very well. I think that we routinely achieve really good outcomes because we set that expectation.
What's been the most unexpected barrier in trying to build support for young people in Milton Keynes? Something perhaps that you didn't see coming?
I think the reality is that the experience of applying for a job is quite an intense one. It's challenging for all of us, right? So we go for an interview for a job we want, and that, your heart's racing and you're feeling nervous, and, who really enjoys going through that interview process? But I think if you're more emotionally challenged than others, if you're used to being victimized or bullied or not particularly valued, if you haven't been particularly successful at school, then that situation is even worse. And I think if you're going to a nice looking building and you're going in and meeting a load of very professional, well-dressed people, and you're having to sell yourself, that's a terrifying experience. And I think a lot of our young people shy away from pursuing work because they're so terrified of
Intimidated by the whole
experience.
Yeah.
We had a really good experience where we were speaking to the Holiday Inn, actually, in Milton Keynes, and we were talking about them providing employment support. And the manager at the time said, look, why don't you just invite a group of your residents? Don't tell them that this is a work-related event. Just say to them, would you like to come and see the inner workings of the hotel? So we invited them. They got a tour of the hotel. They got to go and see the leisure facilities. They got a really nice buffet lunch. So there were 8 of them, and they were all sat there having lunch thinking, this is great. They'd been chatting to the cleaners and they were really enjoying themselves and, seeing areas of the hotel they wouldn't ordinarily see. And then the manager came over to them and said, are any of you interested in working here? And all 8 of them, their hands shot up. And I think in the end, 6 of them did get jobs there. And I guarantee you, if we'd have said to all 8 of those, we've got you an interview at the hotel, none of them would have turned up.
What a really innovative approach to dealing with that intimidating experience. That's something that perhaps should be adopted more.
Yeah, but I think the world of work has become a lot more informal, hasn't it? And a lot more flexible since the
Yeah.
pandemic. And I think that that's positive. And yeah, we should continue to do that.
If you could change one thing in the local system tomorrow to improve outcomes for young people, the young people that you work with, what would it be, do you think?
I think probably a wider understanding that there is an issue. I feel like the local authority are working incredibly hard in incredibly trying circumstances because they've got far too many families with children that can't find somewhere decent to live. They've got far too many young people who need to go into care and they haven't got the appropriate places for them. So they're fighting those fires. Our client group just don't get a look in really in that regard. And I feel like, our society has been very obsessed with money and markets and consumerism and less so on just meeting the ordinary needs of ordinary people and offering everybody a dignified life and decent set of circumstances. And if that doesn't change, life's just going to continue to get harder and tougher for everyone, actually, I think. So that's what I think needs to change.
And what would good collaboration look like between a charity like YMCA and perhaps the local authorities, the schools, the health services, the employers? What could that look like in practice, or what does it look like when you see it happening from your own experience?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. I think that so many of our vulnerable young adults will have touch points with so many different organisations. For our youth and community work, there's lots of young people who have stopped going to school for one reason or another, have developed mental health issues that require support. They might also have issues around neurodiversity. There might be situations going on in the family home where there's sort of concerns about risk, and then they might be being considered to need to go into the care system. And I think there's lots of very well-meaning professionals doing their best, but they're all coming at it with a certain set of constraints.
Mm-hmm.
And so trying to put that young person right at the centre of all of that and meeting their needs is really difficult. And I know because I see it, we don't have the right resources and the right facilities to provide the support that's needed. So we want to try and grow and develop our accommodation-based services because it can act as a platform. It's a base. If we can provide a safe home to young people, then we can work with all those other agencies to provide the support they need, and we do. We've got links with all sorts of other organisations, and through that you can achieve better outcomes.
Take yourself back for 15 years and imagine you were talking to that Simon Green 15 years ago. So for anyone who's sort of considering a leadership role in youth or homeless sector, what would you tell that Simon Green now, the most honest piece of advice in terms of what they're about to embark on and what that might look like and what they could do to make a success of what they're doing?
I think don't be drawn into trying to pretend that you know more than you do and that you're better than you are. We touched upon that already. So I think just be honest, seek out help and try and learn and improve. I guess don't be afraid to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And I guess the most important thing is just do what you love. And if you're motivated to do it, then, before I came to work here, I was doing jobs where I was not motivated to do them at all. And work was a chore. Sunday night was the worst time of the week. I was thinking, oh no, I've got to go and put in another week of doing something that I really hate. And, when I moved into this territory, I took a pay cut and probably from that perspective, maybe, it would have been very easy to say, why are you doing that? But I did something that matched my motivation. And I think if you do that, then you will do well and you'll do better. And, I think for most people that work here, if not everybody that works here, work is, I don't know, it doesn't feel like work. We get this feedback routinely, it's just integrated in your life, and it's a joy to do.
And to that extent, do you feel that you found your why when you joined the YMCA as its CEO?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's been an unbelievable opportunity to do what I've been able to do, and to continue to be able to have that impact, very specific impact, and conversations I have with young people. I was having a conversation with one of our residents earlier about the challenges of getting a driving test, and just so all of that is great, but also to be involved in really strategic things. And last Monday I was in Parliament doing a launch event, and so there's an opportunity to impact on government policy, and all of that's really exciting. So yeah, I feel like after a lot of hard graft, I've reached a position where I can enjoy what I do.
That's great.
Have a lot of impact, and I'll continue to do that as long as I feel that I'm adding value.
Great. And we're quickly creeping towards the end of the interview. But before we do, I wanted to move on to philanthropy, partnerships, and the future. So this is really an opportunity to speak to current and future supporters, existing supporters. If you were speaking directly to a potential funder or corporate partner, how would you explain why supporting YMCA Milton Keynes is a smart and meaningful use of their resources?
Yeah, well, funnily enough, last week I had good examples of both of this. So there's a company in Milton Keynes who've been very supportive of us for quite an extended period of time, and their founder has a sort of personal connection to the cause as well, and they're about to do some significant fundraising work for us, and they're talking about supporting us on an ongoing basis financially, and that's wonderful and obviously really helpful. But the conversations I've had with him over the years, and he said to me, what would success look like in our partnership? And I quite genuinely said to him, what I'd like you to do is find a resident of ours and a job in your organisation that resident was perfectly suited to, so that they go on and have a really meaningful career in your industry, and for us to have enabled that through our partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't achieved that yet. We've had a couple of attempts, but we're still very committed to that. So I feel like it's that partnership rather than being a transactional relationship. And we held an event here on Friday last week to celebrate. We've got a mental health service that was funded through the lottery, and we're halfway through a 4-year funding program. So we did a celebration event, but also focused on, we invited commissioners from the statutory services in Milton Keynes who fund mental health services, and that was about showcasing to them the high impact that service is happening, and the fact that in 2 years that funding will fall away, and if we're not careful we're going to lose a really powerful and impactful service. Sustainability is really important to us. Demonstrating impact is really important to us. And I guess what I liked most about that event was we had our young people in the room, young people that utilise the service, and we created an opportunity for that melting pot for the funders and statutory services who have responsibility in this area and our young people to all come together. And it was such a high energy and lovely event. Yeah, that's what we're all about. I'm a bit pretentious, but I keep talking about our YMCA just being a platform for people to work with young people and support young people.
Mm-hmm. And so alongside those two examples, are there any other sort of kinds of support that you'd be looking for, whether it's funding, skills, jobs for young people, advocacy? What would make the biggest difference to help you achieve what you want to achieve, do you think?
Yeah, well, all of the above. And, community fundraising is important. So if people are running a marathon or doing a cycling challenge or doing a golf day, all of that, of course, we'd welcome the support and we'd welcome the funding. But we're really trying to lean into this idea that people can come and support young people through our YMCA by spending money that they might spend anyway. So our cafe, our conference facilities, we want, businesses who need to hire meeting rooms or hold events or have business meetings over lunch, all of that, to be able to utilise this YMCA, and in doing so, to be able to help fund the work that we do, help create employment opportunities for the young people here. And what's wonderful is we do it all so well. The quality of it is so high that people are always delighted when they do, and they'll continue to use us, not just because they can support young people, but also because they get a really high quality offering. And so, it's delightful to be able to do that.
So thinking like maybe 5 or 10 years into the future, do you have any thoughts about what those 5 or 10 years might look like and what success is going to look like then? Because that's another kind of period of time where you might see big change and all sorts of things can happen in that time, which will demand you to to enhance your services, increase your services, do more in the region, perhaps.
Yeah, well, in all honesty, last year I sort of reflected upon that. So I've been at this YMCA since 2009, so sort of 16, 17 years. It's a long time. We've achieved so much during that time, and I was reflecting last year, is it time for me to hand over the baton to someone else? If I'm not careful, I'm going to be completely unemployable. So do I want to go on and do something in another city? That was quite a deep and meaningful reflection. Took quite a long time over that, and I was speaking to the chair of our board and some of my colleagues, and ultimately the conclusion was that I didn't feel the time was right to move on. And I got a lot of really positive feedback through that, and we're about to write a new strategic plan. We'll write that this year and launch that in the autumn, and I think that will have some exciting stuff in there. And I think that what I'll be looking to do is really embed what we've achieved so that it remains strong regardless of who's here. The culture's so strong and the routine work is so embedded that continues to be good. But then also a few new and exciting things that I think are necessary. And then I'll review again, and I think there will come a time where I need to say, okay, somebody else take up the reins, and I'll go and do something else.
Well, that'll be a sad day for a lot of people, I imagine. We've pretty much reached the end of the sort of formal questions for the interview, but we're going to move on to some quick fire questions, with just a bit of fun to finish things off. And the first one is tea or coffee, Simon, and how do you take it?
Yeah, coffee all day long. I do recognise it's more of a drug than a drink, but
Has the coffee shop downstairs been a good thing in that respect for you? Probably not.
Exactly, yeah. Strong black and often. That's how I take my coffee.
Okay, great. And would you say you're more of an early bird or a night owl?
Definitely a night owl. I don't like getting up in the morning.
Yeah, okay, great. And after a particularly heavy day dealing with difficult situations, what helps you sort of switch off and reset?
Well, yeah, lots of things. And I've got a very active family life and swim quite often on the way home. I like to crank my music up in the car and have a good sing song.
Mm-hmm.
And the midlife crisis has arrived, and I bought a motorbike recently, so I'm looking forward to a bit of more sunny weather to get out on that.
Have you always ridden a bike?
When I was younger, I had a Vespa when I was in London, so I used to think I was Phil Daniels out of Quadrophenia.
Yeah.
But then when I moved to Milton Keynes, the roads were a bit too fast for a CC, and when we started having children, my wife made it very clear that I wasn't to be riding around on a motorbike. But yeah, the kids are all grown up now, and probably the life insurance policy is more useful than I am these days anyway.
Fair enough. What's one thing about you that might surprise people who only know you as the CEO of YMCA Milton Keynes?
Blimey, I should have thought about this. So actually, I had a really interesting experience. My wife's stepbrother was the drummer in the band Baby Shambles. There's a music industry 7-a-side World Cup that is held each year, and Baby Shambles were invited to play, and Pete Doherty made it clear that he wanted a team to be entered, but none of the rest of the band could play football. So we got invited in as a bunch of ringers, and we went and played in a celebrity football tournament at Millwall's ground. And Neville Southall, the great Wales goalkeeper, was our goalkeeper for this tournament. Yeah, we won this celebrity music industry tournament. We were being booed by the crowd. So we played Blue, the boy band Blue, in the final.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
the crowd were almost exclusively young girls who were cheering for Blue and booing us and shouting, "Who are you? Who are you?" But we won. Amy Winehouse awarded us the winning medal.
Wow. So this was a few...
while back. It was a while back. But actually, there was a photo of me that was the holding page for the music industry. Bizarrely. So, yeah, a bit of a long-winded answer.
That's not the answer I was expecting. It's a good one. Simon, thank you so much for a very open and thoughtful conversation and for bringing to life both the realities, the possibilities for young people in Milton Keynes. You've given a clear sense of just how fragile things can be for the young adults you support, but also how the right environment, relationships and opportunities can completely change someone's direction. And you've also been really honest about the pressures and responsibilities of leading a youth charity through difficult years and what it takes to rebuild, stabilise and then start to grow again with a really clear sense of purpose. And to everyone listening, I hope this episode has prompted you to think more deeply about the young people in your own community who might be one or two pieces of bad luck away from needing support like the support that MKYMCA provides, and about the role each of us can play in offering something more stable and supportive to build from. So thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Dean.
In our upcoming episode, we'll continue exploring these themes of place-based philanthropy and care, including a conversation with Vanessa Holmes from Milton Keynes Hospital Charity, where we'll look at how fundraising can help transform hospital environments and patient experiences across the city.